To introduce JavaScript, we're going to take a little bit of a detour from what we were actually meant to do. And we're going to talk about this site called Untitled Sans. That if I scroll up and down the page, notice how this changes font size. So imagine that we had someone going into our CSS and just updating the font size of our H1. Almost like going, font size is, it's not 60 anymore, but 61, 62, 63, 64, all the way up to, say, 100. So now, obviously, this one is a lot bigger than this one. So this is kind of what's going on Untitled Sans. As I scroll up and down the page, the browser is calculating how big it should be. So the further down the page we scroll, the bigger this will get. So this is the kind of idea of what we want to do with JavaScript. How do we go about this? Well, what we need to do is add some kind of script to the page. So in my code, currently, I have a few things. I have HTML, I've got star sheets, I've got some images, and I've got a font file, but I don't have any kind of interaction. The only real interaction I can do with CSS is really kind of to do with hover states. What I want to do is add something on scroll. I want to make some calculations that basically work out what this should be. Now, of course, I don't want font size 100 in my final CSS. I want to calculate this on scroll. So I'm going to get rid of this for now, and I want to move this into a brand new script. How do we do this? So in my JavaScript file, well, I don't have any in there at the moment, so I need to add one. So I'm going to add a new script. I'm going to call this, what should we call it? Scroll.javascript. So scroll.js. Now, if this is the first time you've ever seen JavaScript or ever written any JavaScript, JavaScript is quite a clunky language. It is a quite tricky thing to learn. So if this looks unfamiliar, don't worry. What we're going to do is add this scroll.js to the page. So in the same way as what we have with our images, we have our images being pulled into the page. We want our scripts to also be pulled into the page, just like an image would be. So at the bottom of our page, what we're going to do is add a script tag. And what we're going to add is which script tag that we're talking about. Well, in here, I'm going to add a space. I'm going to add src for source. We want to pull it into the page, just like an image is pulled in. And this is going to be equal to, in quotes, well, we've only got one script file called scroll.js, scroll.js. Now you might notice that HTML is always .html, CSS is always .css, JavaScript is always .js. So what do we want to do on scroll? Well, what we want to do is pick our H1 tag and change its style. What do we want to change in its style? Its font size. What do we want to base it on? Well, how far down the page we scrolled. So in our code, what I'm going to do is add a comment. In JavaScript, a comment just looks like 2 forward slashes. I can just write out what I want to do. What I want to do is pick the H1 tag, which kind of makes sense. And I've gone on a new line and done 2 slashes to add another comment. I wanted to, and when I scroll, that's not just me, it's when the user scrolls as well, calculate how big the font size should be. Now later what we'll do is we'll change the variation of this. It won't be the font size, but this is the kind of rough idea of what we want to do. So this is in 2 parts. So I'm going to split them up. So the first thing I want to do is pick the H1 tag from our code. I want to save this so I can use it elsewhere in my code. So I'm going to save this. So to save something in JavaScript, what I'm going to do is write the word const. For a constant, this is something that doesn't change. In here, what I want to do is pick the H1 tag. Now H1 is just something that I've written. This could be called H1 tag, it could be called H1 heading, it could be called whatever I like. But this is equal to what? Well, we want to save something to something within the page. I want to pick within my page just the H1 tag. So just like we do in CSS, we say H1 and then curly brackets. I want to pick from my document, which is the word for page. This is a JavaScript special word for picking something within the page. In the document, I want to do something to the document. I want to do something by doing a dot. I want to pick a certain tag. To pick a certain tag, I'm going to write the words query selector. And then in brackets, what I want to do is tell it which thing to pick. Now, the moment you get this red underline, just because it doesn't know which thing you're talking about, in quotes, we want to pick the H1. So this H1 over here doesn't really do anything. It's really, this is picking from our browser what we want to do. So we've picked within our page what we want to pick from a tag list, H1. Next, what we want to do is when I scroll, I want to calculate how big the font should be. So kind of like what we do here, we've picked this thing, and now what we want to do is listen out for any scroll event. Now there's one thing to just keep in mind. One thing is we have a page, which is called a document in JavaScript, and then we have a window of what we can see within the page. So when I scroll, basically the document is moving up and down here. The document is moving within the window. So the window is scrollable. It's the document is moving up and down. And it's the bit, we're looking through the window, what we can see is part of our document. So when I want to listen out for anything on scroll, it's when the window is being scrolled. This kind of browser window is being scrolled right now. So what I want to do is pick the window. Now, again, JavaScript is complicated stuff. Don't worry if this doesn't make too much sense. We'll cover it quite a lot throughout the rest of the course. What we want to do is add something to the window called an add event listener. We want to listen out for something. So what do we want to do in here? Well, we want to put some round brackets to say do this. Whenever we use round brackets in JavaScript, it means do this right now. So in here we say on document.querySelector, now we want to run this thing H1. So in here, we're going to add two things in here. We're going to add a scroll event. So we want to listen out for scroll. And then after this kind of quote, we want to add in a function, round brackets, curly brackets. Again, if you've never done JavaScript before, don't worry, just kind of follow along for now and kind of just go with it for now. And then we're going to open these things up. Now, if you remember from CSS, curly brackets means do something. Here, what we're trying to say is whenever we scroll, we want to recalculate each time we scroll how big the font size should be. So how should I know how big the font size is? Well, first of all, I need to know how far down the page we are. So to do that within my calculation, I'm going to add another constant. Now, constant here runs across this entire script, but because this constant is in these curly brackets, it's only available every single time that we scroll. So here what I'm going to do is save a constant called pixels. How far down the page have we scrolled? Well, this is to do with something else within the page. So notice in the moment it's getting a little sad face because it doesn't know what to do. We want to tell it how far down the page we are. We want to tell the windows page Y, with a capital Y, offset. Now, again, this is part of JavaScript, it's part of the browser. We'll make this easier a little bit later. So we're going up a little bit of a hill now. We'll come down the other side in a minute. So we want to pick how many pixels down the page that we've gone. The next thing we want to do is change the font size of the H1. So the H1 we've saved to something called H1. On this H1, we want to do something to its style. What thing do we want to change within its style? Well, we want to change its styles dot font size. Now, JavaScript has this idea of camel case. So for instance, we originally had font dash size, and this turns into, in JavaScript, font, we remove the hyphen, and then put the capital here. So another example of this would be eventually we would have font variation settings, and this will turn into font V, capital V, variation settings later on. So that's how we pick between the two. So this is CSS to JavaScript kind of notation. What do we want to change as part of this? Well, for now, we'll just make this equal to pixels. Now there is an issue here. Font size, when we usually have it, is something like, if we scroll up, 60px. This number that we've just passed in is just 60. It's 60 down the page. So we're also going to add to this plus, and in quotes, px. So again, this is all brand new stuff if you've never done JavaScript before, but what we should see is if I scroll down the page now, this just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. as we scroll up and down. So at the top of the page, of course, what this is going to turn into is 0, because we're 0 pixels down the page. If we scroll to 60, then it's 60. If it's 100, then it's 100. Just like what we've got with Untitled Sans, as we start to scroll up and down the page, it gets bigger and smaller. Now, the one thing you might notice is if I scroll right to the top of the page here, it caps out at exactly 12 pixels. So what I can do as part of this is add in an actual like font size, let's call it. So I'm going to add another constant above here called what the font size should be. And this is going to be pixels from up above. So this thing, we're also going to add 12 to it. So if this is 0, this is 12. So this whole thing is 12. So this will never go below 12 because we can't scroll any further up the page. But the thing is, we're still basing our font size on this original thing. So let's just change that to font size. So the font size is now pixels plus 12. So now what we get is if I scroll to the top, there we go. This is always 12 pixels. It's the minimum it can be. If I want to add any kind of weight into this, for instance, maybe it's going too quick, what I can do is multiply pixels by a number. So then to use multiply in JavaScript, we're going to use an asterisk, and then maybe we do like 0.2. So this is always going a little bit slower, 0.2 plus 12. So now what we'll see, if I scroll down the page, it's not going as quick as it did originally. There's still a minimum because this is 12. And this would be 0 times that. So what we have here is some kind of calculation. This is kind of exactly what Untitled Sans is doing on this page. It's doing exactly the same thing. So this is a tiny bit of JavaScript that we can use. Again, don't worry about JavaScript just yet. We'll make it a lot easier in the next project. So we're not going to do it quite to this level. But what we need to do next is change the font variation settings.